Picture this: the night air thick with smoke biting at your throat, the crackle of timber splitting under heat, sharper than any blade, the scream of a woman rising raw, then breaking into silence, the stench of burning hair and flesh crawling into every breath, the glow of fire painting the faces of 100 villagers watching, not speaking, not moving. Imagine standing there, your skin prickling from the heat, your ears ringing with a silence heavier than the scream itself. No one dares to look away, yet no one dares to step forward. Eyes of children widen as shadows leap across their faces. This was not justice, it was obsession. Europe in the late medieval and early modern centuries was a land wrapped in shadows. The air itself felt heavy with fear and hunger. Crops failed with cruel regularity, fields lay bare after endless winters. The plague had swept through towns, leaving streets littered with the dead, and survivors whispering that the devil himself had walked among them. Children were told that sickness was punishment. Priests warned that storms were divine wrath. Every thunderclap, every rotting harvest, every infant death demanded a reason. And when answers were scarce, people turned to superstition. They believed evil lurked in neighbors, in widows, in healers who knew too much about herbs. A glance across the marketplace could be enough to spark suspicion. A whispered prayer in a different tongue could mark someone as cursed. Religion held the world in its grip. The church was not just a place of worship, it was the supreme court, the hospital, the school, and the voice of authority that touched every corner of life. It promised protection, but also fed terror. Priests thundered from pulpits about Satan's armies. Inquisitors walked among the people cloaked in both scripture and fear. They carried books, ink, and parchment, yet their words could weigh more than any weapon. To challenge them was unthinkable. Faith and obedience were not choices, they were survival. And within this atmosphere, the idea of witchcraft became a perfect enemy. It explained every misfortune, every death, every storm. If your cow sickened, it was the woman next door. If your child wasted away, it was the midwife who cursed your house. If a man's pride was broken, it was a spell cast in secret. The courts began to act on this fear. Trials were not fair hearings, they were rituals of control. A woman accused was already guilty. Her neighbors might testify against her simply to keep suspicion away from themselves. Men in robes listened and nodded their pens, scratching on parchment as though they were recording holy truth rather than gossip. The accused would be asked impossible questions. How did you fly at night? Who gave you power to turn milk sour? Why do storms follow you? To resist was dangerous, to confess was demanded, and to confess meant death. This system of power thrived on paranoia. The more people whispered, the more trials fed themselves. The more fires burned, the more others stayed silent. What followed would not only shatter the lives of countless women, it would shape entire villages in silence and scar generations with fear that lasted long after the flames died. It begins not with thunder or fire, but with a whisper. In the narrow lanes of a village, a group of women gather at the well, their voices low, their glances sharp. One speaks of milk curdling in a pail overnight. Another recalls a child fevered and delirious after the old midwife visited. A third swears she saw a shadow move against the moon that was not of this earth. The whisper travels from doorway to doorway, from market stall to chapel. A pew, it grows heavier each time it is spoken, reshaped into a certainty. By dusk, the village no longer wonders if it is true. They are convinced. The accused is rarely present when her trial begins in secret. She may be kneeling in her cottage, grinding herbs for a poultice or stirring a pot for her children. Yet outside, her neighbors are already weaving her guilt. The silence of one man becomes agreement. The nod of a priest becomes evidence. The fear in a child's eyes becomes testimony. Psychology turns the village into a single mind. Fear is a contagion, spreading faster than plague. To question the whisper is to risk becoming its next target. And so, even those who doubt keep their voices hushed. It is safer to point than to protect. It is safer to obey than to resist. Obedience is not always born of belief. Often it is born of terror. Men accuse to shield their own failures. Women accuse to protect their families from suspicion. Children repeat the stories they overhear until they become truths carved into memory, and the woman at the center of it all, she has no chance to defend herself. When the bell tolls and she is dragged into the square, the crowd has already decided. She sees only familiar faces, but none will meet her gaze. Friends turn away, neighbors clutch their rosaries tighter, mothers hold their children close as if her shadow might stain them. The ritual is complete before a word is spoken. The whisper has become a sentence, and her fate was sealed before she ever spoke a word. The trial does not begin in a hall of justice. It begins in a chamber thick with smoke and silence. The air reeks of sweat soaked into wooden benches. Wax drips from candles that burn too slowly. Shadows dancing against stone walls. The scratching of quills on parchment fills the space like insects gnawing at flesh. Ink blots spread like bruises across the page, each mark a piece of her fate. The woman stands before them, shivering, her hands bound, her body trembling. Her eyes search for a face of kindness, but find only masks of authority, robes of black and crimson robes that smell of dust and incense. The judges sit high above her as if she were less than human. They do not ask if she is guilty. They ask how she is guilty. Questions rain down sharp as daggers. Who gave you power to curse the harvest? Whose name do you whisper when the moon is dark? How often did you lie with the devil? Each question is a trap woven so tightly that silence is an admission and denial is a lie. The crowd that gathers treats the chamber like theater. Every gasp, every murmur feeds the spectacle. For them it is not truth being sought, it is fear being managed. If she is guilty, then they are safe. If she burns, then their sins are lighter. And beneath the court another room waits, colder, darker. The torture chamber they call a chamber of truth. Iron chains hang from the walls, clinking softly like whispers in the dark. Wooden frames stained with sweat and blood stand ready. These are not instruments of justice, they are instruments of persuasion. When the judges grow impatient, the accused is taken below. The smell changes here, less of candle wax, more of rusted metal and old wounds. The silence is broken by the crack of rope stretched taut and the muffled sob of another prisoner somewhere unseen. Confession is not requested, it is manufactured. They will pull her limbs until she screams the words they want to hear. They will press her body until her voice breaks into obedience, and when she admits to the impossible, they will write it down carefully in ink as proof of divine order. The psychology is cruelly simple. The judges fear chaos. They fear a world where plague and famine are random, where misfortune has no explanation. So they demand confession because it restores order. The more witches they uncover, the safer they feel. Their paranoia becomes righteousness, their cruelty becomes holy duty, and yet in their eyes flickers something darker. A hunger to dominate, to control, to see obedience carved into flesh. This is not faith, this is obsession, and it drives the trial forward like fire feeding on dry wood. The woman screams, her voice breaking into silence. The quill moves across, parchment recording her damnation. The candle wax hardens into black stains on the floor. The chamber breathes in her pain and exhales it as judgment. The trial ends, not with truth, but with performance complete. The judges rise, the gavel falls, the sentence written in ink already burning in every mind present. Her body will be carried not to freedom, not to mercy, but to the pyre, and the flames are waiting. If you are still here listening to their voices, you already know their silence deserves to be remembered. Take a moment to pause with us, subscribe, like, and share, so these forgotten stories do not vanish into ashes again. Every voice you help us carry forward becomes a small act of defiance against the silence of history. The square is prepared before dawn. Men drag heavy carts of wood into the center, stacking the logs into a cruel architecture of death. The smell of tar seeps through the air, thick and sticky, clinging to skin and clothing. Iron chains rattle as they are carried forward, their weight promising what is to come. Children peer from behind their mothers, skirts, eyes wide yet unblinking, as if drawn to a spectacle they cannot name. By mid-morning, the villagers gather. Every cough, every shuffle of boots on cobblestone echoes. In the tense silence, the accused women are led into the square, their steps faltering, their faces pale under the grey sky, their wrists bound with coarse rope, their ankles tied so tight the flesh swells against the fibers. Each movement scrapes the skin raw, leaving marks that will never have time to heal. The pyre looms above them like a grotesque altar, the logs stacked high, the tar brushed thick, the smell sharp and nauseating. Birds circle overhead, but none dare land. Even nature seems to hold its breath. They are lifted, chained and bound against the wood. Some whisper prayers, their lips trembling. Others stand silent, eyes fixed on the horizon, as if refusing to give the crowd the satisfaction of fear. One woman weeps quietly, the sound so fragile it cuts sharper than any scream, and still the crowd watches. Some press forward, their breaths quick and shallow, eager for the moment to begin. Others look away, yet do not. Leave to turn back would be to show disobedience. Their silence is its own confession of complicity. The torch is brought forward, its flame flickering against the wind. The smell of pitch and smoke thickens. The crowd leans closer, as if the heat has already touched them. A hush falls over the square, so complete that even the crackle of the torch sounds like thunder. The flame meets the wood. At first only smoke, rising pale grey and hesitant. Then the crackle becomes a roar. The pyre groans as fire licks its edges. The women cry out, their voices weaving with the sound of splintering wood. The air fills with a stench that no one forgets. Hair burning sharp and bitter, cloth curling into ash, skin searing with a sound like boiling water. It crawls into every nose, every throat. No one can escape it, not even those who came to watch with hunger in their eyes. Some in the crowd cheer. Others cross themselves, muttering prayers as if their lips could absolve them. A few look away, clutching, their children close, as if to protect them from the truth they themselves have chosen to witness. Yet no one moves forward, no one dares to stop it. The psychology of the moment is a mirror. Fear binds them together tighter than any rope. To watch is to belong, to doubt is to risk. And so the crowd convinces itself this is justice, this is holy duty, this is safety, bought with the screams of another. The women's cries grow weaker, swallowed by smoke, until at last only the roar of flames remains. Their bodies blacken, their shapes collapse into ash. What was once life becomes a shadow dancing against the firelit walls of the square, and then comes silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence that follows violence. A silence so heavy it presses against the chest. The crowd stands motionless, eyes wide, throats dry. The fire still burns, but no one speaks. The burning ground is littered with ash. The smoke rises into a sky that has seen this too many times before, and in that silence hangs a truth no one dares to say aloud: they are guilty too. When the flames finally died, the village did not celebrate. There were no feasts, no songs, only the smell of smoke clinging to every stone and every garment. The ashes were shoveled into the earth, yet they never truly disappeared. Wind carried them across fields, dusting crops with the memory of fire. Rain washed them into rivers, so that every sip of water tasted faintly of fear. The homes of the condemned stood silent. Doors swung open in the wind. Pots sat cold on the hearth. Children left behind wandered the lanes, hollow-eyed, their futures already marked by the sins forced upon their mothers. Some were taken in by distant relatives, others left to beg, their lives reduced to whispers of shame. Fathers worked the fields in silence, Their hands blistered, their backs bent, yet the soil seemed heavier than before. A crop grown on the ashes of a mother did not nourish the same. Every meal carried a bitterness that no prayer could wash away. The village square where the fire had raged became a place of uneasy silence. People crossed it quickly, eyes fixed on the ground. Children were hushed if they asked questions. The laughter that once echoed there grew rare. The ground itself felt cursed, as though it held memory like a scar that never healed. But the deeper wound lay in the place of women in the community. Those who had spoken too freely no longer dared to raise their voices. Midwives worked in shadows, fearful that their knowledge of herbs might betray them. Widows lived in isolation, shunned by neighbors who saw danger in independence. Even a woman's kindness could be twisted into suspicion. To survive meant to be silent, to be small, to be unseen, and yet silence was not safety. For every fire that burned, another accusation was always waiting. The fear did not protect it, only spread. Families lived under the shadow of suspicion for generations. Whole communities became shaped by paranoia, their bonds of trust severed, replaced. By watchful glances and hurried prayers, the church grew stronger in this silence, its authority fed by obedience, its words unquestioned. People told themselves the trials were necessary, that the fire had purified their world, but deep within each household, in the quiet hours before dawn, the doubt remained. They knew something had been broken, something no fire could cleanse. The ashes did not vanish. They lingered in memory. Centuries have passed, yet the echo of the witch trials has never truly faded. The world may no longer gather in squares to watch fire consume the accused, but the instinct that fed those flames still lingers quietly within us. The fear of the unknown, the need to blame someone for suffering we cannot explain, the hunger to control those who step outside the boundaries of obedience. It shifts its form, but not its essence. Today, it may not be called witchcraft. It may be called rebellion, it may be called dishonor, it may be called disobedience. But the shape of the accusation is the same. A woman who speaks too loudly is silenced. A girl who walks too freely is judged. Communities still whisper their suspicions behind closed doors, and fear still finds its way into law, into tradition, into power. The psychology of scapegoating has not changed. When storms rage, when economies fail, when disease spreads, we still search for someone to carry the weight of our terror, and more often than not, that weight is placed upon those with the least power to resist, to reflect on the witch. Trials is not only to grieve for the women burned in centuries past, it is to recognize the patterns that repeat around us, the same fear of difference, the same silence that protects cruelty, the same illusion of safety bought at the cost of another's suffering. Imagine sitting in that square centuries ago. Now imagine the digital squares of today. Accusations travel faster, but the frenzy is the same. Crowds gather in comment threads as they once gathered by the pyre, and silence still equals complicity. The lesson is not locked in history. It breathes with us now. It asks us quietly each day. Whose voice are we ignoring? Whose suffering do we accept in exchange for our own comfort? The past is not gone. Its ashes still cling to our hands. In the stillness after centuries, their voices remain, not in the official records which wrote them only as guilty, not in the sermons that branded them as servants of darkness, but in the quiet places where memory refuses to die. You can feel them in the old stones of villages where the fire once roared, in the silence of abandoned fields where children once waited for mothers who never returned, in the faint bitterness of herbs still growing. Wild at the edge of forests once feared as haunted, they were healers, they were mothers, they were daughters, they were simply women who lived. Yet their lives were broken beneath the weight of suspicion, their names scattered into ash, so that even history itself looked away. To honor them is not to reopen the wounds. It is to acknowledge the truth that was silenced. It is to speak the words they were never allowed to say, that they were human, that they were innocent, that they deserved to live, and so we remember not with spectacle, not with fire, but with reverence. Every whisper of their pain, carried forward, becomes a form of resistance against forgetting. Every act of remembrance restores a fragment of the dignity stolen from them. The fire has died, the ashes have settled, yet memory endures, because memory is stronger than silence, because truth is stronger than fear. And though centuries have passed, the echo remains. The walls remember even when history forgets.